Representative Nelsen, how are you?
I'm great. It's good to be here, and thanks for what you do. It's one of the hardest parts of being in the legislature is when you make your decisions, what people see on social media and what really the concerns and the issues in the bills, they're not always the same. And it's really nice to be able to get out and talk about some things. And you can't, how's that go if you're arguing with somebody and you can't tell them why they're wrong? Heaven's sakes, they might be right.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming in. The only reason the platform works is people like you are voluntarily coming in to explain it. And you are right. Like, I spend all day, every day, talking to people about issues in Idaho, and they are so numerous and they are so complex that I don't know how anybody formed a worldview. Like, I don't know how I was coming up with my idea of what the world was before I did this. Even 2 months ago, it's like, what did I think was happening in the state? Like, I can't even remember because it's been just like a 5-gallon bucket every 2 hours of information gets poured into my head. I'm like, duh. It's, you know what it's like? It's like that scene from The Matrix when he's downloading a bunch of information. He's like, anyway, bad movie. Great movie, but probably not your genre. Not a Matrix guy. Doesn't matter. Sci-fi, it's great. Listen, you're involved in a lot of areas that I hold near and dear. You're in education, you're in resources. I mean, you're in ag. This is a lot. There's a lot going on here. So first off, the education conversation has dominated this legislative session. Obviously, the bill is sitting on Governor Little's desk right now. He did promote a call-in voting system, which is crazy to me because, like, how do they determine somebody's in Idaho? Who knows? Talk to me about where we started and what ultimately landed on his desk.
From my knowledge and everything that happens in the State House when you're on the House or the Senate side, it doesn't encompass all bills. But from my view, this was maybe one of the, my words, one of the poorer bills to address it because it's the most wide open. We're handing out $5,000 checks. I have huge indigestion of just simply handing them out. The homeschool community in our state is really strong. There's some wonderful examples of homeschooling, and they're scared to death of this because anytime you pass out money, right behind it comes all the rules and responsibilities of doing that. And I'm really in favor of the accountability part of it. Our nation has tried, I think, in the welfare side of things of simply passing out money. From my view, that clearly simply doesn't work. And maybe that I'm an old-fashioned conservative on budgets, but the old issue of a balance sheet, whether you take it off the spending side or you take it off the income side, a balance sheet, income and expenses, they have to balance. To me, we have public schools standing in the corner with a straitjacket on. We've told them what to teach, how to teach it. I mean, you go down the whole list of all the requirements we give to our local school districts. And then we come back and we say, well, we don't like the way you're doing this. You could get better better results. To me, another guiding part of this is that public schools have to take everybody by law. Charters, privates, everybody. They've picked a mission, what they want to do, and I'm not arguing with that. But what I'm arguing about is the public schools are getting stuck with a lot of really expensive kids, and they should be addressed. But some special ed kids, if it costs a school district $70,000, $80,000 to address their needs, bring in specialists, and do all the things they need to do, we're not paying different on that. That's why I'm really in favor of the school superintendent's issue of weighting different kids and paying different because what they cost. A special ed kid who's costing $50,000 a year, that's a huge cost to a local district, and especially really small districts. It's really tough for them to do that out of a general school budget.
What you're articulating here at the end in particular, with special ed kids costing more. There was this horrific story that I heard recently where a special ed kid in a local district left campus. And again, this isn't like a 7-year-old. This is, like a 16, 17, 18-year-old. So like a near grown up, right? Left campus and then ended up in a culvert or a ditch or something. It wasn't good. Law enforcement had to come. You had to get paramedics, all of these things. And it sounds like an atrocious situation. We're like, how did this come to pass? And again, I don't know the details, to be clear, but what some people were articulating around this subject is, look, once somebody, like, you cannot lay hands on like a 17-year-old, especially like a special needs or disabled person. Like, you can't physically restrain them. If you're like a special ed teacher, you don't get to wrap them up, grab them, double leg, take them down, pin them down. You can't do any of that. So essentially what tends to happen, at least some people says, like, when somebody goes, removes himself from campus, or you can't restrain them with normal doors and whatnot, you essentially just have to follow them as adults, walking with them, because you cannot physically restrain them. And then they get themselves in a bad situation. You have to call the police. You have to call paramedics. It's this huge, huge problem. So just imagine the manpower and the adults that you have to have involved, ready to engage in that kind of situation. Yeah, it costs a lot of money per student compared to, just a normal kid who would sit there, and not have to be restrained and not want to leave campus. Just an average student. This is a completely different situation for people. And yeah, it costs a lot more. So I totally understand, at least from what you're saying, which is, look, there's a variety of ways that we should compensate schools, because they have to engage in different hiring and different staffing for different types of kids.
And maybe I guess I would throw in for that point of view is, what do you do when they're violent? I mean, here's kids that are almost full-size adults, and they're really violent, behavior issues. It's a really complex thing, and to maybe step around it in a little bit broader view of things is, in the private industry, the customer is always right. Whether you approve what they're thinking about or not, you're delivering a product to your customers. The sad part in public schools is we've constrained their abilities to adapt, right, and do what they want for the customers. And every person that's made the jump from public to charter or private schools, the first thing most of them say, if you listen carefully, is, my kid had problems. The public school didn't address them. And I'm tickled pink because I've now found a place that they can address that. And it's kind of an irony. We're telling public schools how to conduct themselves, and on the other side, we aren't happy with them, and people are wanting other products. If you're in a business and your delivery of product isn't going that well, what do? You listen to your customers and do that. And the ability to do that is really expensive. I think there's a couple different ways of school funding right now. There's one proposal to rewrite it, if you will, and then there's the superintendents to put some emphasis on the more expensive things. Every time I hear people that they didn't get what they wanted in the public schools, if you look at the budgets and how thin people are spread, counselor to students, however you want to look at that. Here's a teacher with 30 kids, and they try really hard, but how do you give one kid a whole bunch of special attention and not short shrift everybody else? So that, to me, the basic business model, it's got to change a little bit, because what I hear from everybody that's gone to the private side of things is, we're delighted with the customer service. And the public schools, we're still telling them, you've got to do this, you got to do that. I think it was Dave Lent, the chair of Senate Ed, said, by his count, there were about 15 federal rules on schools in Idaho, and there were some around 30 state rules for schools in Idaho. And you can't have it both ways, especially from top-down issues. I really like local control, and if you're going to tell a local school board, to say this diplomatically, if you're going to tell a local school board what they have to do, you better know their business. And my idea is, they're the ones that know the best what their community needs, how to adapt to their student needs, and you can go clear on down the list, Right. But there's a way that, how's that go when you start out? If you start out wrong, your results probably aren't going to be all that good.
Right. And to your point, Superintendent Critchfield, State Superintendent of Education, gave me a few weeks back a packet that was probably like at least half a centimeter thick, huge paper this big, spreadsheets printed out on all of them, with all of the different federal and state rules and regulations. We're talking hundreds. And you just talk CPR training, food nutrition training, like anti-bullying. You go down to I had Senator Nicholson last Friday. She was talking about the cursive bill that she brought. So we have a cursive requirement that people are able to read and write, but that's a requirement that you're able to read and write in cursive. Okay, that's one, I believe, state requirement. And then on top of that, it's, hey, how do we know this requirement is being fulfilled and met? So now we have to put another regulation on for let's test it, and let's test it in this way. So now schools not only have this thing, but now they have to verify they're doing this thing. I'm working with a bill that's coming through that'll hopefully be to the House Ed Committee soon that has to do with, hey, if a public school district or charter school hands out internet-based technology to children, you have to meaningfully warn and educate parents about what that means, what the risks are. That's going to be another requirement. None of these requirements from a state or federal standpoint exist in the private school. And again, to your observation that, hey, we have this public school system in a straitjacket in the corner. They have to do only what we want them to do. They're restrained as far as how they can modify their systems to better meet the needs of their customer. And then those customers go away to, hey, this private school that can accommodate me flawlessly or accommodate me much more in line with what I want. Yeah, I think that's a real problem.
There's also a point of the stick that broke the camel's back. If you look at management of schools, large districts have different people assigned to do different areas. Sure. That's a whole rabbit hole you can go into. But when you skip to a small rural school, there's one administrator. Sometimes there's two, but a lot of times the superintendent is the high school principal or grade school. And they've got this pile of reports they have to grind through that their contemporaries in the city, there's a whole crew that simply fill those out. And there's a little bit of, we have to fill some reports out for the feds, and maybe the state ought to get the data from those instead of having all these different reports we have to fill out. And that flies in the face of accountability. Of course, we want everybody to do well. We want to evaluate how you did well, and whatever you do, you need to turn around and say, well, what was successful and what wasn't.
Sure.
I always like the old adage, really successful people make more mistakes than anybody. They don't make them very long, though. And if you watch people that manage good businesses, great people work for them, and to copy a little bit in the public sector of how they're doing that. And all our rules just kind of handcuff people from digging in and doing that.
Yeah. To that point, and then we'll jump off, Ed, but I've had, superintendent of the Fruitland School District, Stony Winston, as well as Norm Stewart, who's the superintendent of the Marsing School District. Marsing has, I think, like 850 students in the entire thing. Both of these men, they have to fill out the same forms that like West Ada has a team to fill out, or Boise School District has a team to fill out. To your point, I was asking Stoney specifically about this, like, who's involved in reporting all this information? You're looking at it. He was like, not only am I the superintendent for the entire district, but it's like me and one other guy who's, like in the office doing something else. Like we have to take time out of almost on the daily to like, okay, we got to fill out more forms. We got to do all this report. So he doesn't even have the capacity to engage in his specific superintendent operations on a daily basis, uninterrupted from like the filings of the things. So,
yeah, out of one side of our mouth, we're the least regulated state in the nation. We're very proud of that. And if you look at our economy, something about that is working. We're the envy of most states. And then on the other side, when it comes to vouchers, private schools, that whole area, less regulations are better. We want the marketplace to work. We want all these things to happen. And then look at poor public schools with all the things that are piled on them, and nobody's pulled any of those back. You're still back to, the local control. Those locally elected school board members are in the middle of their community, and somebody needs to listen to them a bit.
Moving on, your next to the ag and the resources actually, as a Venn diagram would be, really have a lot of overlapping, because we with our natural resources, with our state lands, we actually do grow trees. We also engage in agricultural operations like cattle and whatnot. These are two things that really got into a wrangle, at least in recent years in your area, with the with the Lava Ridge wind project. Now that was a a federal designated project, right, coming out of the Department of the Interior with the Bureau of Land Management. This was not a project that was going to be beneficial to the state of Idaho. The wind turbines that were being built and the power generated from them was going to be shipped to Southern California. This is a private entity. It was on federal lands, but in your area. That did get overturned, right? That did, or excuse me, not overturned is not the right word. That did get stopped when President Trump came into office. That doesn't mean if we got a different administration in 4 years, it could just get restarted right instantly, similar to the Keystone Pipeline. I know people were worried about that for years. But the point is, we have this kind of wrangle that we're getting into with the federal government with things like Lava Ridge, with things like federal management or mismanagement of our public lands that lead to gigantic fires across our state. You're sitting on two committees that deal with these things. What can be done?
I think first there needs to be local participation in it. If you look for examples of even just pictures of the forest on state lands and federal lands, I don't think the state can afford to take it over. It's just too much money, fire suppression. Look at the Boise interagency fire budget for the year, and then look at Idaho's budget as a state. But there has to be some input from the local level, common sense. I think it's probably asking a little much for a person who's appointed head of the Forest Service nationwide to be able to dial into what works in local forests, local BLM things. There needs to be some input to it. Second issue is how much do you walk away from multiple use? To me, that's a huge issue, that public lands aren't for one use. They're for a bunch of things. Of course, there's a grazing lease out there, but a lot of people recreate out there. People like to hunt out there. There's some people that just like to go out for peace and quiet in our public lands. And where do you let them participate in that? One of the issues coming up, or we're addressing in resources committees, if you're not aware, they review the rules, if you will, for the agencies. It came up in resources that the state lands board in all of their leases have an opt-out issue from the state side of 6 months notice, and they can cancel the lease. That's pretty concerning for a ranch family that's been grazing on public lands, making improvements to them for a couple generations, to say, well, we changed our mind, we're going to go with something else. And in fairness to the lands, here are solar farms that are wanting to rent the state lands for megabucks, and that turns a multi-use state land into a single-use issue.
Yeah, you're not growing grass for cattle to eat underneath solar panels.
And nobody wanted, the issue of state lands the land board needs to manage state lands for the best possible return. My opinion is most people, will of the legislature, if you will, is that they're managed for the best return, but that means, we don't want it lowballed out to a rancher. If there's another one beside him that wants to pay 20% more, that needs to happen. Same way with the timber lease. We want the best money we can out of our logs. But the intent of the legislature, do we really want to turn multi-use public lands into single-use issues? And it's the same issue with Lava Ridge, is how much input do the local organizations get? The most offensive part of Lava Ridge, I spent years on planning and zoning. That possibly could be the worst application I've ever seen. There was no mitigation for anything. We've got geologically a really young aquifer down there. There's layers of cinders, et cetera, et cetera. When you do all that blasting, a legit application would have said, if we're going to mess up some local wells, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we'll address it. That process is all in place. Lava Ridge had none of that. When you dump in hundreds of people to come in and build them in little communities like Dietrich, Richfield, Shoshone, what's that going to do to the schools? Most don't have places to live for people now that they can afford. When you dump that many people in that are working on a federal project with all the federal incentives and funds, I would say they may get in the marketplace and have a place to live, but what about the people that they're displacing, the local businesses they can't find labor now to run their businesses? And are you really going to put a 300 trailer house city out there to build the thing? Those are the things you have to plan on going in, not after the fact.
And I actually had Dean Diamond on, who's been was a very vocal, just civilian in opposition of this. His property bordered one of the portions of that plot, and he was articulating very similar to you. He's like, listen, where's our restitution if something happens to the aquifer? We all rely on this. We got lava tubes, we got all kinds of things down there. Excuse me. And what we get if it doesn't work, right? It's also my understanding that there was nobody from like individual residents all the way up to the county commissioners, all the way up, that actually spoke in favor of this, that wanted it. And the project was just going forward no matter what. Now, look, we're kind of in a wrangle, and I understand people are driven from examples like this to saying, hey, we need to get our land out of the hands of the federal government, because this is a classic example of government overreach, them not listening to us. This is a problem. But at the same time, the nation benefits from having having land in the hands of the federal government, specifically because exactly what you're just saying. If our state lands are intended for the highest and best use, and that means if there's a rancher that's going to pay, a couple dollars more per acre or whatever it might be for grazing, we have to go with that, right? And if that means additional projects or purchases or costs of maintaining state lands go up, well, then we have to figure out a way to get rid of it, because it's not in our charter to take a loss on this land. Federal government, quite conversely, has no problem taking losses on things. And, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it does benefit with this multi-use, nationally preserved land that we all live right next to and we get to benefit. We just don't like also when they come in with 700 plus foot wind farms.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And there's a little bit of this. Well, first, to thank our congressional delegation. They've been front center on getting this turned down. Saturday, I went to a press conference with Senator Risch, laying out how he believes very firmly Lava Ridge is done. But
that's wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Senator Risch.
Absolutely. But in a sense, Lava Ridge has kind of sucked the oxygen out of the air, if you will. And going on behind it, if you look at the areas of the world and our nation that have gone with intermittent, it's another rabbit hole of what's green and what's not green, and how green is it?
How green is green?
Yeah, or not.
Yeah, right.
But frankly, the issue of intermittent power as opposed to steady base load power, every area that's gone for intermittence, okay, behind it they have really expensive base load to back it up with, and even if they're using natural gas generators, which makes up some of Idaho's base load, you're only running them part of the time. So somebody has this huge investment in them, and they're not getting that greater return on investment, if you will. So everybody that's gone to intermittence, wild numbers, but basically their power is almost doubled. And if you add batteries into the situation that are even more expensive, you're pushing a triple on the issue. So if you look through Idaho, ag is still Idaho's main resource. If you double the price of electricity to all especially the deep well farmers, they simply can't do that, and they're out of business. And kind of creeping through the back door on this that nobody's really looking at is, what is electricity really going to cost us? The bills, historically, the bill to a pumper, which a deep well pump uses a lot of electricity. The bill to them has always been less than a person in the city, simply because it costs so much to have all those meters and all right. The whole issue. Here's a one-stop shop for electricity. Well, now that's being flipped on its head. Some of my farmers are calling up saying, what in the world? Our electrical rates the last few years have been going up like crazy, because now the heavy users are being billed for this really expensive base load to keep things going. And you don't want to diss the issue of opportunities. There's a point that the Southwest has way more solar energy than they know what to do with in low use times. So to go in and buy that power that's really cheap, that's quite the plum if you want to go do that. But are we going to bail into their system economically? You compare California power rates to Idaho power rates, and there's a lot of things in California we're not too wild about, but economics, that's certainly one of them.
Yes, I was speaking with Senator Woodward last week, actually, about the rural power issues that people are grappling with right now, because rural power co-ops and that have aging infrastructure are trying to update and modernize their infrastructure as quickly as possible. But we also know, looking at other states, that fires that have blown through and caused enormous damage that could arguably be started by, like, let's say, power lines or something like that, first off, you never got those houses back, right? Like, it's not that, bankrupting rural power co-ops and whatnot fix the problem. But what does happen is, even once the fires go through, everything's destroyed. You also destroy the power infrastructure, because a lot of people end up suing, right? They feel the power companies were negligent and it was this big problem, and they end up suing, and then the power companies go out of business, and then to pay off the lawsuits, everybody's power gets more expensive. You have people come in, take over. So, like, these are real problems that led to astronomical energy prices. I had, in my former lifetime living there, I had, several rounds of solar on my house. It was like almost my entire roof was covered with solar panels, and I had backup batteries. And even in my last years there, when we would have rolling blackouts, I couldn't even turn on my air conditioner because I didn't have enough load coming from the batteries to turn over the compressor. So our refrigeration still worked and our lights still worked, but it was this goofy, like, wait a minute, this is not even a solution for one household, right? And here it was a sunny day, power goes out because everybody's using the ACs. I can't even get my power needs in my own house met. So to imagine using that system for statewide applications, and look, I don't know anything about electrical engineering. I just know what happened and what didn't happen. And what didn't happen is I didn't have a viable alternative to a base load generation system.
Can't disagree a bit. And you have to say, at the beginning of that process, the consumers, electrical consumers, they do have a choice on that. If you bury some of those lines, I mean, we have subdivisions with buried lines everywhere. If you bury those lines, there's a huge cost to that. The decision is made, and especially you can blame it on, corporate people. They don't want to do it. But that or a co-op, either way, that still comes back to the consumer. And that's a little bit of the issue of, maybe we ought to limit some of that liability, not because the people that are houses burned, that's horrible. But back at the beginning, everybody decided that we'll take the risk. We can't afford the solution, or we don't want to afford the solution. So, there's a point of, we made the decision up front, and at the end of the day, sometimes you just simply have to live with it.
Right.
To add to that, there's also a decision, I think even in California, some of the local zoning things, if people go out and, like, these 8-foot tall underbrush basically next to their houses that burns really hot, if they go out and decide to address that, there's a bunch of ways to do that.
Right.
And they've decided that they don't want to do that. So, when things go badly, you go back to the beginning. Well, how did we get here? And in my district, I have a super split district, Jerome, Lincoln, and Blaine. And in my district, I think my district goes to Smiley Creek, but not the whole Stanley Basin. But if you followed that, basically the shoulder of the White Cloud Peaks, that whole shoulder, Alturas, Redfish, the whole thing just about is burned off in the last couple of years. And everybody does it for the right reasons. 3-4 years ago, there was an application into the Forest Service for a small pole and post operation to go in, take out some of that the dead wood and clean the trees out, basically forest management. And that was denied, with a lot of people we didn't want it. They didn't want any of that. Well, look at what's happened with the fires. I think the timber industry has said, if you don't cut forests, the trees don't live forever. They're going to die. And we can either have these massive fires that burn them off, or we can do some forest management and, frankly, harvest some of that timber. So it's really hard to get sucked into some of these arguments and not stay above it. And where are we going to go? You can't go in and log an area and have it be totally, absolutely pristine. But the loggers are doing a pretty neat job of what they do, not having tons of erosion. You look at the pictures of the creeks and the rivers behind some of these massive burns. Half the topsoil is down in the river. There's going to be a little bit of an upset by a logging road, but given the two, for me, there's no choice. We need to do that.
Right. If you want to lose this mass natural resource, the topsoil, I mean, anyway, look, dude, you said it very well, which is, hey, look, we have trade-offs no matter what. Yeah, you might have a logging road and you might lose some trees, but the alternative is collateral damage when you burn, not just with the suffering and I was coughing like I smoked 2 packs a day my whole life, like last summer. It's like I don't want to do that again. You have an interesting position in Idaho. I got these. Have you seen the news articles about the town hall meeting up in Coeur d'Alene over the weekend, or it was like Friday or something, with some lady getting dragged out?
Oh yeah, I think everybody has.
Oh, man, like what a train wreck of a situation. But you live in this really interesting eclectic district where you have a wide variety of political spectrum, which leads to what I think, and again, I'm an idiot. You've been here a long time, so is your family. But I think one of the things that makes Idaho so unique is you have people coming to the table looking for pragmatic solutions and looking to really solve things. And especially when you represent a wide variety of political leanings, it's like, okay, listen, we really need to double down on not something that's a partisan solution, but is just a solution, because I represent everyone. So I can't be like, hey, this is a conservative solution, or hey, this is a liberal solution. It's like, no. This is a solution, and this is why it's good for these principles. Like, that's a really difficult and fine line to kind of walk in this political climate.
How did you figure that out? In my
I don't
life,
know, maybe the gal getting dragged out of a city hall meeting or something.
That may have been up north, but frankly, I was at a town hall meeting on Saturday.
Nobody got dragged out there.
And, well, it degenerated a little at the end. And the point needs to be made that meeting my constituents, whether they agree with me or not, that's one of my favorite parts of the job. I don't just sit and vote for a score this way or that way. I try to really hard to read the bills, know what I'm talking about, whether you agree with me or not. But when I vote, I'm firmly for the direction I voted. My seatmate, Ron Taylor, Senator Taylor, is a Democrat. I'm a Republican, and my seatmate is in the House of Representatives, Mike Pahanka, is a Republican. But, we were talking about doing some town halls, and Ron said, well, I'll see what I can get done up in Blaine County. And we said, sure, whoever organizes it, we're glad to come. And then I think the newspaper called and said, are you planning on going to this town hall? And I said, you bet. Well, then it ended up the local Democratic Party was sponsoring it, and a well-done, disagreeable or agreeable town hall I'm fine with to go back and do that. And frankly, this one went really well for about an hour and 20 minutes.
What happened? You got to tell me. I wasn't there. I did interview Senator Taylor a couple of weeks ago. Like, what happened to dissolve it?
Let's just say it came off the hinges a little bit. And it wasn't for the issues. One of the few people I've talked to that he was clearly for Lava Ridge, wanted it, and he was really concerned with global warming. And I said, very respectfully, sir, I disagree with you, and started to go into why. Well, he had to butt in and interrupt. And out of control. One of the points is, if you want respect, give some respect. And so that didn't go overly well. And then it came off the hinges even more as it went through. And I think the thing to take home from this is, whether you're on the far left or you're on the far right, if you're trying to shout people down and talk over them, that's not the way to get to good solutions. And sadly, it also taints people with your point of view, that they may share your point of view and they don't share your respect for decorum. It taints them a little bit. You know, right or wrong, when somebody's really rude and they're screaming away, I'm not looking through all that to see what their point of view is, why they believe it. That totally obscures the validity of their point of view. And usually there's a bunch of reasonable, rational people that share a point of view, if not exactly sort of the same. And they're getting short shrift in it, and they're the ones that, for all this free speech thing, the one person's rude screaming it out runs roughshod right over the top of all the reasonableness. So you bet I'm for town halls. And I think there's a point with public officials and everybody, when you lose that decorum, maybe it's time to just say, we intended the best with this. It's not working out, and we'll come back later, but this one isn't going to work.
Right. Right. Or, hey, look, if you want to scream at me about global warming, how about we do this? How about everybody that has, come here tonight to talk about more things than just global warming? How about we don't subject them to that screaming? All right. Like, why don't you just hang out? Like, let's wait till this is over. I'll get a cup of coffee or something stiffer than that, and you can just unload on me all of the things you think, and let's just finish this out, because I want to hear what you have to say, right? Like, and look, I'm not trying to tell you how to manage crazy. Like, I've never been in that situation. I wouldn't have the guts to even go to it, frankly. But yeah, I very much agree with you that when people engage in civility that are steering towards a certain topic, that adds value to that mindset and to that principle. It's like, well, let me just explain to you why I think free speech is great. Well, then you're like, okay, people for free speech are very reasonable. Like, this is great, right? But if I come screaming at you like a crazy person, it's like, wow, those free speech crazies are like, they're out there. Like it's something, it's almost like we need to relearn how to talk normally. I think people have hit this fever pitch and this anxiety where they feel like the only answer is to dominate the entire conversation, that it's all wrapped around. You know what's interesting too? Not just is it the way people engage in this, it's almost like, hey, do you care about global warming in the abstract? Like, do you care that Venus is hotter or cooler, or Mercury is hotter or cooler? Or do you worry that your grandchildren will have a hospitable planet to live on? Because the answer is really, I'm worried about my grandchildren. And you can align with those people and be like, hey, I'm worried about my grandchildren too. We actually agree. We're both worried about our grandchildren. Okay, now that we have some point in common, is there another, like, can we start walking down these different points of commonality until it's like, okay, well, we largely agree, man, whatever the dude's name is, right? And then it's like, great, let's start there. Let's start on all our points of commonality. And then in the last one, it's like, all right, we got 9 out of the 10 points where we agree. We disagree on this 10th point. Let's sit down as two people that agree 90% of the way here and have that conversation. I feel like if you rerouted things, not you, but like if people rerouted things in that manner, God, man, what a difference that would make. We instead of starting on the 10th point where we're going to hit a brick wall, it's like, no, we're largely on the same page.
To me, social media is great. It ties our culture together. But
it's terrible. Do you hang out on social media? Are you insane?
I don't even look.
It is a dumpster. I'm actually going to start this new thing where people say the most crazy, insane things to me on social media. I'm going to start screen recording these, just taking a picture of it and posting it. It's like, hey, can we have a broader conversation about what we should do with this person? This person says, Idaho is the devil and you're a piece of trash. Okay. Like, what do we do with this? Is this somebody who's like in good faith communicating? Is this somebody who we just ignore? Like, let's engage the community to have a better conversation about, like, when people talk this way, what do we all agree is the right thing to do?
Yeah, well, one, social media, you don't get any feedback. The more controversial things you say, and maybe the ruder you say them, it gets lots of attention. In real life, if Jack treats Todd a certain way, Todd's going to take a stick and hit Jack right between the eyes. There's no feedback, if you will.
Right. You don't get that social feedback where somebody's smiling, they're nodding, they're frowning, they're walking away, they're like ignoring you. All that social feedback that allows us to keep communicating in a human way.
And number two, you lose anytime you start calling people names, and usually that's when it really boils down to the attack and the nastiness, nobody's looking at the issues. This is just a personal attack. They're called a bunch of names. Everybody knows all the names that fly around on social media of where you are and blah, blah, blah politically. And frankly, they really don't have much to do with your points of view on things. And people are believing their social media, and they repeat the ugly names, blah, blah, blah. But they have no idea what the issue was, why you voted one way or another. And how do I say this diplomatically? For all the effort to be dialed into things, they're out on the fringes of things, not because they don't care, but because they don't have any touch with reality in it.
Right.
So-and-so said, well, this is a terrible thing. So they just puke out the thing. Well, here's a terrible thing, and all the people that wanted it, here's a bunch of insults for them. Well, you're back to reality based on what?
Right. And I think your point is actually really well made. For the effort people put into consuming as much information as possible about a topic on social media, in the absence of somebody like you showing up or the other people who voluntarily showed up in the show, I would have no ability to actually know what's going on. Zero ability, right? And it's only because you have been willing to come in and other people have been willing to come in that I can invest time into this social media platform. I'm like, okay, now I have real information. But again, I think there is a thirst for this. I think people really are trying to figure out what's going on. This is their chosen venue of information transmission. And usually, on average, you get really bad information, right? Because they're trying to understand. They're trying to research. I mean, you look no further than things like cloud seeding. People freak out all the time about cloud seeding, and it's fine. Freak out if you want. None of my affair. But like, where are you freaking out from? Why are you freaking out? Because you saw some videos, or people say all the time, like, oh, we went down this rabbit hole. It's like, where was the rabbit hole taking you? Like, who was supplying you with, the information that you consume for 3 or 4 hours? People want to know. They want to find out information, but it's so difficult, and again, considering that's the number one place people are, and it's very hard. Like, you don't have time to like make an Instagram and sit there all day, like putting out information. It's just too hard.
Poster child for that would be food tax. You get a bunch of, emails, and the people care. They bothered to email you that they want to stop the food tax, if you will. Well, when you look under the hood, if you will, for it, we're making, after we refund it to every Idaho citizen, Idaho's making, it's different sales tax et cetera, but we're making 100 to 200 million on that as a profit for the state. And who are we profiting from? Tourists, because we have a huge tourist industry, and when they're here, they're leaving money with us. And the other part is undocumented people. Wherever you come out on undocumented, the employer withholds the taxes, payroll taxes, et cetera, and sends them in. The other part is all the undocumented people. That's another place they're paying taxes when they buy groceries at the store. So if you get rid of food taxes, you've got to figure out to come up with somewhere 100 to 200 million in the state. And I like the idea of tourists. We're taxing them a little more as they come through our state. And I like the idea of undocumented people contributing to our state's economy the way they are.
I literally at 6 a.m. Sent a text to Representative Monks because we had a conversation about the grocery tax, obviously, and I put out his explanation of it, essentially what you're saying, like this 5 or 10 minute clip, and it has hit 43,000 people. And I was saying, like, how unbelievable is it that we have this mechanism of communication where 43,000 people will voluntarily get educated on the grocery tax. Now, whether they agree with you or not is irrelevant, but imagine the difficulty of getting 43,000 people in like some mass stadium and explaining this to them for 10 minutes. It's impossible, but like, this is what we have now. We just need you coming on more. We need you coming on more, explaining these things, filling up the airways with better information.
Happy to.
Well, Representative, thank you for coming in today. Is there anything you'd like to say here at the end? I know we've chatted about quite a few things.
Just thanks for what you do. It's really appreciated in the public realm of, we just talked, how do you get the information out to people? There's every bill in front of us. There's good to it and bad to it. And how do you find your way on these things? And how do you sort through the issues? And once again, the clip in social media is good and bad. Well, I wish the world was that black and white. It's not. So thanks for what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming in. Listen, let's do it again. And because again, there are a couple things coming through. I specifically want to talk about later on in another episode, talk about whether or not the governor's line items for the $60 million for paying back the fire suppression from last summer, and then the $40 million line item coming up, and the $30 million for increasing water resource in the state gets approved, because obviously JFAC hasn't even come up with an estimated budget yet, but we'll get there. Anyway, thank you for coming in, sir. I appreciate you.
Thanks for everything.